Okay, guys, so it is 12:03, and I know people are joining still, but let us just start. We're very excited to have everyone join this webinar. This is our second webinar that we've been hosting. And the first one we had, really, we got such awesome feedback, and so we said, hey, let's do it again, and let's get some new awesome people to join. And we were able to really get today two awesome top of the line world class speakers join us. We have Michael Pegues from the city of Aurora and Paul Reiser from Techtown Detroit, and I'll be speaking as well. And it's going to be an awesome panel because we really want to take an opportunity to talk to cities and governments and just innovators from all over the world, and really just explain, how we can learn from each other and see what best practices are, what we've learned, and really just find ways to kind of bring our thoughts together to ultimately take action and really help others and help residents in cities all over. So it was extremely important for us also to get an different array of people to speak and also to explain more about what they're doing. And obviously we'll leave room for questions at the end, and just kind of a little bit about the ground rules and how we're going to proceed. So we're going to start, Paul will actually start with his presentation, and then Michael Pegues, and then myself, and we'll leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. If you do have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A and write them, and we'll go over them. And obviously we'll open it up for kind of verbal questions as well at the end. So that's kind of it. And again, we're also excited to say I see people from all over the US and internationally join, really from all spectrums of the US. So I am very excited that we have such an awesome crowd here. So without further ado, let us start with Paul and his presentation. Paul Reiser really is an awesome guy, and it's really amazing to see what he's been doing in Detroit with Techtown. So I'm very excited for this. Paul, why don't you upload your presentation now?
Perfect. Thank you guys for having me. And we should be ready to get started momentarily here. Okay, does that look okay?
You can see the I think you can broadcast as you see the whole full screen, because it's right now in the slideshow mode.
Okay. Show.
There you go.
All right. So thank you, everybody. This is Paul Reiser. I'm the managing director at Techtown Detroit, actually the director of Detroit Urban Solutions. And thank you, Michael. Thank you, Colu, for Technologies, for having me. I'm so glad to be able to present today. I've been at Techtown Detroit for now about 6 years. And for those who may not know, Techtown is located in the heart of the city of Detroit and is a longstanding incubator and accelerator for now over 15 years that we've been delivering services in the city of Detroit. So I am going to now just take you through sort of a journey into some of the context and background and history on Techtown Detroit and how Detroit Urban Solutions evolved, which is a consortium focused on urban tech and smart city solutions from a regional collaborative perspective. And thereafter, some of the real world opportunities that we've identified in focal areas that we have kind of narrowed in the midst of COVID-19, how it's pushed us to pivot and accelerate some of our movement. So just for, like I said, a bit of a context, Detroit is definitely what I like to call a smart city getting smarter. That began its development on the heels of what many read about, bankruptcy, automotive challenges, and mobility came into focus as a huge opportunity for multiple reasons of what Detroit could do going forward. Sorry about that. And so Detroit and the state of Michigan itself has a large capita of engineers, obviously wanting to remain the automotive and mobility leader and pioneer in the world. Was a immense focus, and mobility touches so much of what we know about and how we act and move, and the tangential relationships to so many other things related to smart cities. It was an ideal first step for us as an organization and for our region. So this just speaks to, you know, some of the trends that we were seeing relative to some of our conversations across the region with city officials, regional governments, and a lot of surveying and talking to city officials, stakeholders, innovative leaders, university leaders, that leadership commitment was absolutely something that was defined as a true necessity for success of any smart city strategy. And this is all as it states in the top of the slide titled pre-COVID-19. So keeping that in mind. Also that there was really beginning to see a lot of great traction from city officials and government of sort of an all-in philosophy around urban tech strategy development, project development, resource commitment, led by mobility and blight removal were two of the kind of key areas that the city and its stakeholders really began to hone in on. And we also started to see creative financing frameworks from various the ways that projects were beginning to look at to be funded. Also smart financing and smart infrastructure financing projects or ideas and methodologies around even unique bond financing and other even nonprofit philanthropy sources for funding as well. And then pilots and implementations started to move from sort of this nice to have to a must have approach in kind of theory throughout our city and throughout our state. And this is really representative of a model that Detroit Urban Solutions put together and with partners and kind of what we landed on. And I think it's a good representation of, it looks fairly complex, but if you look at it, it really is fairly easy to digest because, and I like to kind of draw some focus to some of the key areas that we felt were critically important, and that were this data marketplace and analytics, the importance of citizen science and gathering data from trusted communities and building trust throughout, not only in the private sector in Midtown and downtown area, but also throughout our neighborhoods and with community organizations throughout the city, and layering that with not only city created services, but also corporate creative services. So making sure that we had corporate partners who we've engaged at the table from the beginning, understanding the pain points and the challenges of the city and understanding how they could contribute. And then also the connectivity and acceleration is really a key portion. Middle of the presentation slides here, where it was really important for Detroit Urban Solutions and Techtown Detroit, where we saw that we could make a mark and make some true impact in this larger scheme in some core verticals and subsectors, such as health and wellness, mobility, of course, public safety, fintech, water tech, not listed there as well, but also other key areas that, you know, we just couldn't list them all. And so moving into, you know, how we've leveraged some of our history and deep partnerships, and based on where we stood 5 or so years ago, why we felt we were best positioned or well positioned to take advantage of the opportunity then, and even more well positioned now to take advantage of and really step up to the plate, I should say, with respect to civic tech and smart city development and partnerships. But Techtown has been around now for 15 plus years, delivering services, and helped us to establish a myriad of great relationships throughout the greater Detroit region, from academic institutions to economic development agencies, government agencies, philanthropy, innovators, of course, investors. And because also what is unique to Techtown's business model is that we also have serviced place-based or lifestyle businesses in neighborhoods for 5 years, 5+ years, when we began the Detroit Urban Solutions strategy. So that was also a true positive for us and an enabler for us to move forward and make a quick decision that this was something that we needed to do and that we needed to bring the right partners together. This graph also shows you the good fortune that we have of an immense infrastructure play and asset that we have that sits right across the street from Techtown that we now administer and manage, that offers a myriad of various resources, as noted, that we wanted to shift from a more alternative energy specific type of asset and infrastructure play to a more open, community serving, community inviting, living lab type of approach, to not only leverage the assets that you see from smart IoT homes to microgrid, to lab space, to auditorium and presentation space and gathering space, indoor and outdoor, but also in order to make this a place where ideas could be developed, where collaborations could be formed, and where pilots could be tested and scaled. So we absolutely don't take this for granted, that this is a very unique opportunity for us to be able to leverage and make it available, though, to more of our public partners and our public citizens, so that these ideas can be nurtured and developed. And so thinking of an approach that we sort of took with Detroit Urban Solutions, and Detroit Urban Solutions was formed about 18 months ago. I would say five to 6 years ago now. Detroit was in a much different place, emerging from municipal bankruptcy, from automotive collapse, a lot of economic strife and challenges, lots of population, hiatus or, departure, people who had moved to other states or suburbs or other parts of the country. And so fast forwarding now to about 18 months ago, from the time when we were experiencing a lot of those economic and social and operational challenges, we decided at Techtown that it was an ideal time to bring stakeholders back together who had been at the table 5 or so years ago, looking at models and methodologies of how, when Detroit did in fact emerge from some of those municipal and operational and economic challenges that we were facing, what would an innovation district really look like, and how could we nurture a lot of the assets and make sure that we were well positioned in order to move forward from an innovation perspective. And so about 18 months ago, Detroit Urban Solutions was initiated and started. And it was started under the premise that we wanted to leverage technology, partnerships, and collaboration in order to address regional, urban, and civic tech challenges with technology and smart city approaches. And so about 18 months ago, we jumped directly into the battle, per se, with key partners identified that we had been at the table with 5 years ago. Unfortunately, at that time, 5 years ago, a lot of those partners just didn't have the bandwidth or the capabilities at that time to really focus and own and lead the project. So the framework for what we were intending to develop kind of went into a drawer, quite honestly, at that time. But 18 months ago, we also began to solidify relationships, and 2 key relationships that you see the logos at the bottom of the screen: Data Driven Detroit, which is a leading data analytics and community and civic science organization that makes immense amounts of data publicly available for analyzing, for humanizing, and also for actualizing upon or taking action upon these data sets in a lot of different sectors. And CivLab is an organization that I met in New York. Some of you may know, but they also have expanding operations also to Helsinki, and also they're now in Detroit based on our partnership together. But they are a living consortium and living lab that has worked with NYEDC and a number of other different partners in order to bring together, kind of under a single umbrella, to coordinate and harmonize the ecosystem there, and also again deliver urban tech solutions for challenges faced by individuals and citizens and partners that they identify. We started down the pathway after forming this partnership between the three organizations of really conducting a myriad of stakeholder interviews and ecosystem mapping in order to develop an interactive tool that would be publicly available, made available, led by Detroit, Data-Driven Detroit, but interviews conducted with economic development stakeholders, nonprofits, philanthropy, community organizations, private sector, government officials. We probably have conducted about 3.5 dozen key interviews and plan to conduct another 10 to 12 interviews over the next 3 to 4 weeks, and leveraging that data set in order to allow that to not only better understand the priorities of our region, what projects are already underway, who's involved in these projects, where are there interdependencies and overlap and or maybe areas of duplication that maybe we can ensure Detroit Urban Solutions moves in a path where there's an area for what I like to call the concentric circle, where there's agreement and shared synergies amongst a wide variety of partners. And we are not, in fact, duplicating efforts in that other organizations or projects are already underway. And that moved now into an identification of real world problems based on citizen needs and in key areas of strength based on what our region has to offer. So smart city and civic tech and urban tech strategies are different in many different municipalities and are fine-tuned often to the DNA and the characteristics of each and every city in some form or fashion. There's best practices, there's areas of synergy, but there's not a one-size-fits-all for smart city and urban tech. And so we've taken some of those key areas of water, healthcare, our largest state industry in our state, which many may not know about and think of automatically. I think everyone, connects Michigan to automotive, understandably so because of the long history, but healthcare is in fact our largest industry and sector in the state, in the city of Detroit and southeastern Michigan. It is, yes, mobility and automotive. And then also our creative sector. So we doubled down on some efforts and built upon some programming that we initiated in 19 around the arts sector and specifically in music because of our longstanding history with Motown in music and so many creatives being born here and birthed out of this area and or having roots and connections and ties. So just like I said, leveraging and looking at strengths of our region and double downing on those areas. And so as the COVID-19 pandemic emerged, we saw the opportunity for us to kind of hone in on specific areas. And some of these things, I would say most of these things happen very organically, not pre-planned, but just kind of taking advantage of the opportunity to step into where we felt we were needed, where we could add value and where we could work collaboratively with a great myriad of partners. And so you see in the healthcare sector, in the low here bottom reads MedHealth, which is a binational regional collaborative project and effort in southeastern Michigan and southwestern Ontario that has been working together for 4 years now. And because of COVID, it makes all the sense in the world that we were able to really step in and leverage our partnerships and really help with what I call noise diffusion. And there was a lot of, obviously, and no indictment to anyone attempting to support and help and offer resources, but it got to a point where it was tough for our procurement offices and our hospitals and our health systems to comb through a lot of the information and the resources that were being shared. So MedHealth and Detroit Urban Solutions was able to play a role of sort of a resource marshaling and noise diffusion. There's also a national COVID-19 healthcare coalition, which is C19HCC, that is made up of dozens of organizations nationally. And as Michigan and Detroit begin to see its peak relative to COVID cases and COVID deaths, we begin to really rally nationally with partners under the C19 COVID-19 Healthcare Coalition, led in major part by Mayo Clinic and Mass Challenge and Health and Human Services and other great organizations. I mentioned the artists and music support that we offer via our Motown Musicians Accelerator Collaborative, a partnership with Universal Music, Motown Museum, Motown Records, Capitol Records, to help our musicians who, unfortunately, in so many instances, artists and even some high-tech, high-growth entrepreneurs, I think, have slipped through the cracks a bit relative to some of the resources that have been made available and some of the relief efforts that have been understandably and rightfully so focused on Main Street, on small businesses, on retail shops, which Techtown services and focuses on in a large part. But we also wanted to make sure that we were looking at the creative community as well. And we stood up two stabilization funds. One with a goal of initially quick turnaround, quick launch because of Techtown's size. We're about a 40 employee organization, able to move nimbly and quickly. And we had a goal of reaching $250,000 for small businesses in neighborhoods when the work from home restrictions and the guidelines were impacting, of course, so many of the small businesses in neighborhoods throughout America, and particularly here in our region. We had a goal of $5,000 grants for in an aggregate fund of about $250,000, and it ended up hitting $600,000. But what we quickly realized was that the demand was $1.2 million, and then we moved into a second fund of $500,000 with technical assistance, and then we began to launch a project based on citizen needs and a portal that was also driven by what we call a community engine, which I'll show in the next slide a bit more, that you can see here. And it's just a representation and a model of really moving from data collection from citizens to analysis through a artificial intelligence and machine learning computational engine based on tools from partners such as Microsoft that we're working with, and then also humanizing that data to extract what are the most pressing and prioritized needs of some of the citizens and community members, and then also moving that into actual action and actualizing projects based on need. And this just gives a representation of what a particular or potential mobility focused scenario could look like based on commute options, based on gaps in transportation and equitable mobility solutions, how we bring in data, make that into spatial or leverage spatial transactional data formats, leverage that data by conducting modeling and looking at the overlay of what we've heard from community citizens relative to their needs, and making sure that we deliver solutions that can be visual, transparent, and also have impact. And we have to assess that impact. So it's kind of a circular model that's just represented in a single example around mobility of what we're working with here in the city of Detroit. And last but not least, this just speaks to some of the thought around what we see going forward, that there's obviously a myriad of challenges that have been exacerbated and really amplified around vulnerable populations, around our healthcare systems, around the fragile nature of some of our systems and inequitable structures and systemic failures that we have to tackle. And those are things that we're focused on, as well as the inclusivity and shared prosperity, and also growing community trust, but all being built by partner-driven solutions going forward from building our innovation ecosystem. And that's the conclusion of what I wanted to bring today, just to, like I said, show a little bit of where we come from here in our region, what we were building pre-COVID-19, how COVID-19 impacted and pivoted some of our actions, and gave us the opportunity to really step in and step up with some collaborative projects, leveraging great partners in this region. Thank you for the time.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul, for the awesome presentation. I really enjoyed it. And obviously, even though we spoke a bunch, I learned a lot. So this was great, and thanks again. And I saw there were a few questions, so obviously in the Q&A section, you guys can answer, and we can kind of leave some time at the end. Now, without again further ado, I'm happy to have Michael Pegues present. Michael, if you want to take over the screen.
Good morning, everybody. Let me move here. All right, can we see that?
Yes.
And can everyone hear me okay?
We hear you loud and clear, Michael.
Yep.
All right, let me put this in presentation mode here. Is that better?
Even better. Thank you.
All right, so good morning, actually, to many, and good afternoon to some. So with my presentation and just being conscious of time, I'm going to really kind of focus on what City of Aurora's response was to the COVID pandemic and how that's, directly impacting our strategic plan and also our move to become a more digital government, right? In a very weird way, it's actually, I mean, this is very tragic, from a global perspective. But as we talk about some of the different challenges that we're having, and we're going to talk about some of the opportunities also that actually arise out of this. But, the whole thing about, us having to rethink, the way we do work, right? And to rethink how we work from home during this pandemic, right? And some of the short and long-term actions as part of that consideration from a tactical and also a strategic planning perspective has fundamentally kind of changed the way we work. We all had this conventional wisdom, that, working from home would be very easy, but, that's a very faulty kind of assumption. There's things that are out of our control, right? From a residential internet bandwidth perspective, from not having, the capacity within your, municipality or your state or your region to support that uptick in demand, right? Also software in terms of VPN, also, and not excluding the psychological impacts of workers, residents, and also businesses, and not to get into the social economic aspect of it as well. Go down. So just to kind of set the stage for the city of Aurora, we're a mid-sized city. We're the second largest city in the city of Aurora. We have a population of over 200,000. We sit about 35 miles west of Chicago, right? And keeping in mind that the city of Aurora is actually 46 square miles, right? Aurora falls into 4 counties: Kane, DuPage, Will, and Kendall. Right, we have 6 school districts and 7 townships within our city limits. So you can imagine the scale and the scope that this pandemic has basically, put on the city of Aurora in terms of our resources and the way we operate, right? Mentioning the fact that we fall in 4 counties, and one of the things that even Paul mentioned in terms about data, right? And that's something we'll get into here in a second, about having that localized data is not so readily available and accessible, right? It's there at the federal level, and there's also at the state. But the ability and the access to that localized data is not so readily available. But I just want to kind of just show the complexity of the city of Aurora. We talked about being agile and nimble. A lot of this from the city of Aurora perspective is driven by our leadership and our mayor. Right. One of the things he always talks about, he said, I'm not just the mayor, I'm also the CEO for the city. And, he tries to run it like a business since he's been there since early 2017. So just wanted to give you kind of a high level kind of perspective with this infographic of the different demographics here in the city of Aurora. Right. And also I would make note that this impact planning report is a resource that is available through Esri. And that's information that if you're not aware of it and you use Esri, as I think over 90-something% of most municipalities do, you should consider reaching out to them and asking for this particular module, which is available in Esri. Now, one of the things we talked about is, I mean, this is really the new reality with the city of Aurora. and not just the city of Aurora, with other municipalities throughout our nation here. But at the bottom line of this, I mean, the CIOs are playing a very huge part in ensuring that there's lifelines open for your government, for your businesses, and also for your residents, and enabling those capabilities so people can actually continue to work, right? Relying on different communication frameworks to make sure that people are engaged, that the digital transformation is moving forward. There's also around communications and civic engagement of your residents. Here in the city of Aurora, we have 10 different wards. So that's 10 different personalities in terms of councilmen and women that we have to manage to make sure that they have the capabilities to basically to communicate with their residents, and they have data that they can use to make data driven decisions, right? And and also providing that operational lifeline to our citizen, because one of the things is our residents look towards the city in terms of, hey, what are we doing, right? It goes back to that single source of truth, right? And if we don't have the capabilities there to make sure that we satisfy our residents in terms of that communications, right, a lot of disinformation will start, right? So keep in mind that, you as CIOs, IT professionals, IT directors, if you're not at the table, you need to get at the table, right? And you need to be there with your mayor's office, your emergency management, supporting and making decisions to help us through this pandemic. It's not the end of the world, as we all know. We will get through this. But again, one of the main things is you need to be at the table, because everything that the city does, it's based on that IT foundation, right? You're there to be a business partner and to provide solutions, options, and ideas for your peers and your executive leadership and your legislative leadership to basically to kind of weather the storm. So I know many of you are probably very familiar with this dashboard. It's really the excuse me, it's the Johns Hopkins University, in collaboration with the CDC and the Departments of Health at the federal level, have put out these dashboards. These dashboards are probably some of the most, most visited sites and dashboards out there today. But who does this report really help, right? Does it help you? Does it help your organization? Does it help your citizen? Does it help you, in terms of pulling or gaining insights that you need to be able to make decisions at the local and the municipal level? One of the things that, this dashboard, if you look at it, although it's a backwards looking view of the data over time, right? You really don't see forward looking, right? And again, going back to the point, it's more of a state view, right? And there are some implications in terms of the data, and there's some delay in terms of when that data is actually being reported. When the Johns Hopkins actually added the county level data, the data became much more relevant to different municipalities and even to the city of Aurora. But even then, there's still some gaps, right? So, having that data from the county level is still okay, but one of the things or the challenges, which we'll get into on the next slide, is it's still not granular enough, right? We still need data at the zip code levels to be able to really have a very comprehensive view in order to make real decisions. So I want to kind of show some very tangible and real life dashboards in terms of what we're using here at the city of Aurora. And this is our response to COVID, right? My deputy CIO, Jeff Anderson, has been working, nonstop with my GIS team and also my data and analytics teams to start actually publishing dashboards for the city, right? And kind of breaking those cases down, as you can see, by zip codes, right? And also at the county level, right? And also demographics. If you look at the bottom, there's also a case over time, which is basically looking, more forward. But one of the things that's really important for us in order to be able to act, is understanding, from a predictive perspective, how do we flatten that curve, right? And, what are some of those early containment measures that we can take to actually help reduce the risk, right? Because we know that every action we take impacts our community, and those impacts have positive and negative impacts on our healthcare capacity, on our public safety officers, on the city itself, right? So one of the big challenges or the questions that the city of Aurora is facing is, how do we become predictive, and how do we model different trends based on different collective actions, right? So for example, if 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 we take protective measures, or if we don't, what would be the impact on our public safety officer or the hospitals or bed capacities, right? So if we, implement social distancing, or we don't, right? What is the impact of the number of cases that are actually being reported, right? What if we open businesses early, or what if we leave the business closed, or what if we even stagger the openings of business? What's going to be the impact, on the city itself? Excuse me. So the question is, how do we become predictive? Because it's great to have that data, and you get a view to a snapshot in time, but how do we look forward, right? So if we can look forward and make some decisions, those can have, immense benefits on our local economy, right? So having that data going back again is required to make those efficient decisions, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of different things we can pull, from data in terms of insights to help us to make decisions and providing that information to our leadership, you know. But one of the things is, is again, how can we provide the mayor kind of that forward-looking view, right? And we know that, that information is not 100%, but we know that if we can provide some information with a certain level of accuracy, right, the mayor and the team will be armed a lot better to be able to address some of those challenges. Right. So what I wanted to do here is, as I mentioned, is really just to provide you some recommendations in terms of short-term actions, and these are basically from the city of Aurora in terms of where we see that there's some touch points in terms of, actions that you can take as a city. One of the things we talk about, the digital collaboration tools. You know, since this pandemic has started, I mean, we've looked to basically stand up our our um, our data and analytics dashboard. Now, keeping in mind that was just published, maybe I think it was 2 weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, right? So there was an opportunity there, you know. Um, Also, we're looking at deploying, DocuSign in terms of e-signature, because we're impacted from this, 90% of our staff are working at home, right? There are other platforms we're looking, and we're also engaged with Colu, in terms of their civic engagement or civic innovation platforms, you know, um, for digital currency, right? So you need to kind of look at your portfolio and say, how do we actually deliver additional capabilities to actually enable our employees to work more efficiently, right? And one of the main things is we should always keep in mind security, right? Because again, there are huge risks when you start to basically deploy these platforms. So keep security in mind with everything you do, right? So the next point is in terms of actually looking at assessing risk within your workforce, right? And we've basically identified some gaps, right? And I'm just going to focus on IT here, you know. But the thing is, although we're in early, maturity curve in terms of standing up our data and analytics platform, our GIS was a lot more mature. However, you know, while those dashboards and graphs are good, the predictive piece we're missing, as I spoke about before. So we don't necessarily have the skill sets to go out and build our own algorithms. So that's going to require additional resources and budget, right? So we're looking to partner with also the city of Chicago, because they have some dashboards out there. So we're looking to gain some information from them. We've also reached out to Johns Hopkins Hospital, the Applied Physics Laboratory, right? Working with them as well. And then also with our county, our county health department, which has actually been ongoing. So again, gaps there in terms of human capital and skills, but at the same time, keep it in mind, track these lessons learned, because these are things that you can take out of this unfortunate event to say, how do we plan for the future, right? So we're engaging our partners and customers through various digital channels, right? One of the main things that we all know, the whole the supply chain and resources challenges that we've had. When this hit, everyone's like, hey, the entire city is working from home, right? I think we had less than 10 laptops in inventory, right? We have about 1,200 employees, right? Now, granted, not everyone needed that, but we did have about a need up to date, about 130 employees that needed laptops. So those conventional methods of getting those resources was gone, because when you reached out to your value-added resellers, and I assume that most of you got the same reply as we did, was, oh, we don't have any line of sight. The supply has been returned back or redirected, more than likely to the federal government and Department of Defense, because they have first priority and when there's a state of emergency. So you have to think about creative ways to basically to manage this, again, when there's a contingency, right? We had to reach out directly, excuse me, to our OEMs to basically call in some favors, right? And to get, a lot of laptops, and also in conjunction with actually running around to the Best Buys, right? I mean, we're not too good to run around to Best Buy, right? We procured about 50 from different Best Buys, right? And as I talked about, the communications is very key, right? Understanding the community, right? What are they talking about? So you have that single source of truth, right? In the city of Aurora, we have 3 PIOs, right? We have one for the city, we have one for fire, and we have one for police, right? But with our emergency operations model and our continuity of operations plan, right, it lays out what that reporting line is. So the police and the fire report in to the mayor's PIO. So again, one source of truth. And we have, we use ZenCity, the artificial intelligence platform, to kind of understand, the sentiment analysis and really kind of keep the pulse on what's out there, right? Because as we know, there's so many different, social media platforms, and where people are taking their information is scattered. I mean, it's really just all over the place. So, use technology, make it work for people, right? And these are short term. And again, not to go through these one by one, but in terms of long term, you need to basically to build these in to your technology strategic plan, right? Again, for everyone on the call, we're actually living right now, we're actually seeing a living use case of why we need smart cities, right? Why we need those technologies, why we need those capabilities, to help us to prepare for the future. We need a smart future proof, our strategies, so we can be able to deliver services in a very effective way as we move into this 5th industrial revolution. And just to kind of, sum it up, we all know, since, the internet's actually been created, it's been, based around a few key principles: openness, fairness, and freedom, right? During this pandemic, as I said, we've basically witnessed, a living use case of why we need smart cities, and also the internet. Not even getting into the fact about the disenfranchised communities that don't have access to high-speed, affordable internet. I mean, we could have a whole nother conversation about that, but I won't get into it. But again, you know, keeping that in mind, as in the past, we've taken it for granted. Now we can no longer take that for granted. But I guess my closing words is basically, as CIOs, is just be bold, you know, and just lead your digital transformations. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. We appreciate it. It was an awesome presentation. And again, we will leave a few minutes at the end for questions. I will just say we are a little bit short on time, and with Israel, we just leave a few minutes earlier, so like 12:57 Eastern. So I'll be quick, and we'll just leave a few minutes at the end just for a quick Q&A, and obviously we're happy to answer everything else offline. So just kind of very quickly about us and Colu. We've been around for about 5 years, and our primary focus, for those who don't know, is working with cities like with Michael and like other cities in all over the US and internationally, on ways to basically take these ideas of how to help cities, especially at these times, but also beyond, and how to make them a reality. So we use a white label app. And that app is one where a city can get their own app. And the whole point is really, how do we encourage the behavior of residents to meet these strategic goals that a city has? And we do it, like Michael was mentioning, with a unique city coin. And the whole point is seeing how we can reward, how can we talk about behavioral economics, how can we reward people for engaging in these behaviors? So kind of cutting it to the chase, right now with COVID-19 going on, we have to be very, very diligent about how we can help cities today, meaning what can we do to work with cities to meet their unique needs to combat the effects of COVID-19, but also how to recover. So from speaking to literally hundreds of cities and different strategic research programs that we did in the past month, we kind of boiled it down to a few points that cities need help with most. And those are relating to how we can help save and support small businesses. Those are to show how we can also facilitate communication and participation between the municipality and between residents. Another thing is, how can we get people to volunteer? Especially today also, there's a huge need for efforts for the public to volunteer, and that's something we can reward. One more thing is, right now we see a lot of funding is coming into municipalities and to state levels, whether it's through block grants and such. And one interesting point is we see there's a huge need for equitability, right? Funds are coming into cities, but ultimately we kind of really, from our conversations, have been saying, you know, great, how do we distribute these funds to residents, but also how do we make sure that businesses receive it equitably throughout cities? And often, you know, they come in the form of grants, right? But we also are looking to say, wait, instead of having, you know, the grants as an ad hoc solution for a specific business, why not also have them come into a pool of rewards initiatives that can be distributed to any business as soon as someone actually goes and purchases at the business? And just to explain, and I know I'm digging a little bit deeper into this, but how do we basically take these funds and get people to use them for local businesses and for purposes that benefit the local economy? And that's a big part of what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. It's trying to show how we can use technology to do so. But the main question is really, right, like today more than ever, people's behavior often at these times goes towards the simple, most convenient thing, which often now is buying your shampoo, we say it, from Amazon, right, or from a big box retailer. And a big part of what we're trying to also look at and try to explain to people is, how can we really encourage residents of a community to look and say, wait, why am I purchasing it from Amazon when actually I can purchase this same bottle of shampoo from a local convenience store? And a big part of that is, how is our behavior shaped by what we see around us, and how is that sense of community going to really impact us to take action to find that shampoo locally and then support the local businesses? So we always talk about the 3 layers of civic engagement, and how it relates to it is, people always see kind of in the awareness, meaning obviously, sure, you're aware that you have local businesses around you, you're aware that you have this community sense, and you know what's possible, right? You know that your bodega, your convenience store has these products. On the second note, you know, with the soft engagement, we call it, and really, we know that people do have an emotional connection, right? People know, say, hey, I want to support local businesses. Great, this is awesome. I just wish I could, or I wish I had the capability to. And what we are missing actually is urban action, right? How do you take someone from saying, hey, I want to purchase at a local business, I want to help contribute to my local community? So that's really the point of urban action. So what we do with our app is really the whole point is seeing how we can reward people for taking a specific action and how we can use key concepts of behavioral economics to incentivize people to do so. And that's kind of the trick here. And how do we kind of, is it a 10% discount of shopping at a restaurant, or is it through a sequence we call it gamification, where you say, okay, if you purchase at 3 local businesses in a span of a week, only then can you get a reward of, let's say, 3 city coins. So there's all these unique things, and obviously that's kind of digging deeper into the detail. But one interesting thing we really wanted to talk about quickly here is what we're doing in Tel Aviv and how we're already impacting businesses today. And what are the use cases that we're using that we believe can be extremely helpful in the United States, and obviously from our experience working with cities in the US are working and can work. So number one is an initiative to buy local. So obviously to incentivize residents to purchase at local businesses based on the availability and the knowledge and convenience of going to these local businesses. So part of the app was to give additional incentives, and we already see the impact. So 30% of traffic coming to local businesses in the second 2 weeks of March, once the pandemic started in Israel, came from people who used the Colu app. So we saw that it had a huge, huge benefit on cities. Second is the delivery, right? So a lot of times now, businesses that historically didn't deliver are delivering, right? Hardware stores could be these, arbitrary businesses that never delivered in the past, suddenly now have to deliver because of the closures and everything else. So we are also aggregating a list of businesses that are open for delivery, and that obviously gives the public a way to take action. So they're aware, they can see about it, they can have that emotional connection, and then we're allowing them to take action through it, and that's a huge part. A third is really gift card challenge, which is really saying, hey, we know that a lot of businesses are shut down because of the closures and because of the situation. So these businesses need cash, and residents want to have that conduit of communication, conduit to also prepay for those businesses and give them that much needed cash flow. So that's another thing in the app that we have where you can kind of prepay for a business, and we'll reward people for doing it. So the city, through the app, will reward people for purchasing at these businesses that are closed. Obviously, they'll get credit for those businesses once they reopen, but the whole point is driving people to take that action to proactively support these businesses ahead of time. One other thing we're doing is obviously with volunteering, right? So we want to make sure that we can also encourage people to volunteer through the app and incentivize them. So in Israel, we're doing something with senior citizen homes where people who help senior citizens can get rewarded. And that kind of goes to the other note of also supporting others and people who are in need. And so we also have the option of donating. So as you can accumulate coins, which are like rewards points for taking these actions, instead of just using them on specific businesses for yourself, you can also donate them to local nonprofits. So those are obviously big things. And of course, there are much more, but kind of to sum up, in Tel Aviv, we really have already made an impact. Very quickly, 4,000 residents downloaded the app. We already had $5,000 and probably now much more donated to local nonprofits. This is just from the first 2 weeks of March. So we are really seeing the tangible impact, and it's really all about seeing how we can take action and how cities can obviously bring the foundation so that they can get their story heard. We talk about behavioral economics, that it's not an artificial thing, right? It has to be something that is driven from each unique community, each unique city that has their own nuances and their own interesting communities and people, but it's about giving people the ability to do so and to communicate. So obviously we're happy to discuss this further and to discuss all that we spoke about today. I just do want to be cognizant of time. So again, I thank you. I think we have room maybe for one question, Elad. I don't know if you want to read one.
Just a second, Michael. Yeah, let's see. Actually, one of the questions was for Paul, but I think it's actually very interesting. Paul, maybe you can comment in this forum. You were asked, how did you raise the dollars for the neighborhood businesses program? And I think that getting dollars for these causes is a big mission for everyone that involved with government. So we'll be happy to hear.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And just quickly, I know we're short on time, but it was really a rally of a lot of different stakeholders that came together, from economic development agencies to philanthropy to the private sector to individuals who all contributed to this fund. And we were selected, I guess you would say, or really stepped into this opportunity because, like I mentioned earlier, Techtown being a little bit more nimble than maybe your city government or your larger economic development agencies who also were partners. But we were able to move fast, just very similar to the startups and the clients that we, in fact, support. And for round two, when the first tranche of funding was exhausted, you guys may remember me stating that while we raised just over $600,000 in our first phase, the demand showed well over $1.2 million based on applications that we received. And so we spun up a second fund that was led by a philanthropic organization called New Economy Initiative, who really put in the lion's share of funding for that second phase as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. And we do have to sign off. I know it is hitting the top of the hour. So thanks, guys, again for joining. We really appreciate everyone who took time out of their day. We will share the presentations, and obviously feel free to ask any questions offline. Thanks again, and till the next one. So have a good one, guys.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everyone. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Mm.